Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. A house isn't just a structure of wood and stone. It's a living archive of a family's heart. Every floorboard holds the echo of a footstep. Every window pane, the ghost of a face looking out at a changing world. I should know. I built my house with my own two hands. I wasn't just its owner, I was its author. My wife Clara and I laid the foundation on this plot of land when it was nothing but wild grass and possibility. I was a young architect then, full of ideas, and she was the poet who turned my blueprints into a home. For 35 years, that house was our world. It was where we raised our son Leo, where the walls absorbed the sound of his first steps, his teenage arguments, and eventually the proud, happy phone call telling us he was getting married. When I lost Clara, the house became my sanctuary, my last tangible connection to her. The silence was deafening, but her presence was in every corner, in the scent of the roses she planted by the porch, in the way the afternoon sun hit the armchair where she used to read. I was adrift in a sea of grief, and the house was my anchor. So when Leo and his new wife, Evelyn, suggested I shouldn't be alone, that I should live with them, it seemed like a natural, loving solution. The only catch was that they wanted to live in my house, my anchor. "It's too big for one person, Dad," Leo had said, his voice full of a gentle, persuasive logic that I now see was not his own. "And it's where all our memories are. It makes sense for us to come to you." I agreed, of course. The thought of my home being filled with life again, the thought of not facing that echoing silence alone, was a lifeline. I saw it as a continuation of the story, a new chapter. I had no idea it was the epilogue of my own life within those walls. Evelyn was a force of nature. She was ambitious, polished, and possessed a will of iron. She came from a background she never spoke of, a past that seemed to have been deliberately scrubbed clean. All I knew was that she had remade herself into this perfect, successful woman, a senior marketing executive who moved through the world with a confidence that bordered on aggression. In the beginning, she was the perfect daughter-in-law. She was attentive, she managed the household with ruthless efficiency, and she spoke of wanting to honor Clara's memory by taking care of the house. I was grateful. My grief had made me slow, forgetful. I mistook her control for compassion. The changes started subtly. A vase Clara had loved was put away because it didn't match the new aesthetic. The worn, comfortable furniture we had chosen together was replaced, piece by piece, with cold, minimalist items that looked like they belonged in a corporate lobby. "We're just freshening things up, Arthur," she'd say, calling me by my first name in a way that felt more like a dismissal than an act of familiarity. "Bringing this beautiful house into the modern age." Leo, my son, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged on those very floors, was a ghost in his own home. He was a successful lawyer, but in the presence of his wife, he became a shadow, a passive observer. He would watch as Evelyn systematically erased his mother's presence, his expression a mixture of guilt and a strange new loyalty that did not include me. When I tried to speak to him about it, he would just sigh. "Evelyn has a vision for the place, Dad. She's just trying to make it her home, too." I was being pushed to the margins of my own life. My workshop in the basement, my last sacred space, was the final frontier. She declared it a damp, cluttered fire hazard and announced her intention to convert it into a home gym and wine cellar. That was the first time I truly fought back. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding, and told her no. I told her that was my space, that it was where I still felt connected to my work, to myself. The look she gave me was not one of negotiation. It was one of pure reptilian coldness. "Arthur," she said, her voice dropping the pretense of sweetness, "Leo and I are the owners of this house now." I turned to my son, my eyes pleading with him to deny it. He just stared at the floor, his silence a confession. They had gone to a lawyer. They had convinced me to sign papers I hadn't fully read, papers about estate planning and avoiding probate. I had signed away the deed to my own home, the archive of my heart, to my son and this stranger. I had been a fool. I had mistaken a corporate takeover for an act of love. My status in the house shifted overnight. I was no longer the patriarch, the owner, the father. I was a tenant, a non-paying, inconvenient one. My presence was an obstacle to Evelyn's vision. My stories of the past were an annoyance. My grief for my wife was a clutter she wanted to clear away. The final act came on a Tuesday. It was a day like any other, except that it was the day my life was irrevocably broken. Evelyn called a family meeting. It was just the three of us in the cold, unfamiliar living room. She had a spreadsheet. She laid out in cold, hard numbers the cost of my existence. The food I ate, the electricity I used, the depreciation in the home's value because one of the rooms was occupied by me instead of being a home office. "It's just not financially sustainable, Arthur," she said, the lie so blatant it was almost artful. "Leo and I have decided that it's time for you to find a living situation that is more appropriate for your needs. We found a very nice assisted living facility a few towns over. Your pension should just about cover it." I looked at Leo, waiting for him to speak, to protest, to show some flicker of the boy I had raised. He just sat there, his hands clenched, his eyes fixed on a point on the far wall, a prisoner of his own cowardice. He said nothing. I was being evicted from the home I had built, from the life I had created, by my own son and the woman who had replaced me in his heart. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. A profound, terrible calm settled over me. I stood up, went to my room, and packed a single suitcase. As I walked out the front door, the door I had hung with my own hands, Evelyn was already on the phone with a contractor, her voice bright and excited, discussing the demolition of my workshop. I walked down the driveway and stood on the curb, my suitcase on the pavement beside me, a refugee from my own life. I looked back at the house, my house, and I saw her, a silhouette in the window, watching me. She thought she had won. She thought she had neatly and efficiently excised the final, inconvenient piece of her husband's past. She had no idea that I was a builder, and that I was about to start a new project, the slow, meticulous, and total demolition of her own carefully constructed life. The first week of my exile was a descent into a kind of hell I had never imagined. I was a 70-year-old man in a sterile, lonely room at a budget motel, living out of a single suitcase. The silence I had once dreaded in my own home was a comfort compared to the anonymous, soul-crushing quiet of this place. My life's archive had been reduced to a handful of photographs and a change of clothes. The grief I felt was not just for my home or my wife, but for my son. The boy I had loved, the man I thought I had raised, was a stranger to me, a coward who had stood by and watched his father be cast out. In my despair, I started to dig. Not for revenge, not yet, but for understanding. I needed to know who this woman was, this Evelyn who had so completely dismantled my family. What kind of person could be so utterly devoid of empathy, so ruthlessly focused on her own ambition? My search began with the only tangible link I had to her past, my son's wedding album, which had been in one of the boxes they had so graciously allowed me to take. I sat on the lumpy motel bed and turned the glossy pages, images of a happy day that now felt like a grotesque lie. And then I saw her. In the background of a few of the formal family portraits, there was a woman who was clearly not part of the main event. She was older, with tired eyes and the work-worn hands of someone who had lived a life very different from the polished opulence of the wedding. She was smiling, but her smile was sad. And in every photo, she seemed to be on the verge of being pushed out of the frame. I remembered her, vaguely. A brief, awkward introduction. "This is my mother, Margaret," Evelyn had mumbled, before quickly steering the photographer away to take more photos of her and Leo with a group of her important-looking colleagues. Margaret. The name was a key.
Evelyn never, ever spoke of her mother. When asked about her family, she had a polished, tragic story about being an only child whose parents had passed away when she was young, leaving her to make her own way in the world. It was a story designed to elicit sympathy and admiration for her self-made success. It was, I now realized, a complete and utter fabrication.
The existence of this sad, quiet woman in the wedding photos was a crack in the perfect facade of Evelyn's life. I am a builder. I know that a single crack, if investigated, can reveal a structure's deepest flaws. I took a significant portion of my savings, the money I had carefully put away for a rainy day, and I hired a man who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. He was a retired detective, a quiet, methodical man who understood the art of navigating the shadows of a person's life. I gave him a photograph of Margaret from the wedding album and the little information I had. I told him I needed to understand who she was and why my daughter-in-law had gone to such lengths to erase her. The report he delivered 2 weeks later was more heartbreaking than I could have imagined. Margaret was alive and well, if you could call it that. She was living in a small, run-down house in a forgotten industrial town 3 states away. The kind of town that prosperous people like my son and his wife pretended didn't exist. She worked as a cleaner at a local community college, struggling to make ends meet. The detective's report painted a bleak picture of betrayal. Evelyn, whose real name was Evie, had clawed her way out of that town with a scholarship and a burning ambition. She had systematically cut ties with everyone from her past, including the mother who had worked 2 jobs to support her. The final break came when Evelyn met my son. Leo, with his quiet good nature and his father's beautiful mortgage-free house, was her ticket to the life she craved. A working-class mother with calloused hands did not fit into the new, sophisticated narrative she was writing for herself. So she had declared her mother dead and had not seen or spoken to her in almost 10 years. She had kicked her own mother out of her life long before she had kicked me out of my house. A cold, hard anger began to burn away the fog of my grief. This wasn't just about my home anymore. This was about a pattern of cruelty, of using people and then discarding them when they were no longer convenient. She had done it to her own mother, and she had now done it to me. And my son, my weak, foolish son, had allowed himself to become her accomplice. I knew then what I had to do. My revenge would not be a lawsuit over the house. It would not be a bitter confrontation. That was her style, loud, aggressive, and ugly. My style was the style of a builder. I would find the rot in her foundation, and I would expose it to the light. I would not just return to reclaim my life. I would return with the ghost she thought she had buried. I got in my car and I started driving. I had the address from the detective's report. I was going to find Margaret. I was going to meet the woman whose story was so tragically intertwined with my own. I didn't know what I would say to her or what I would do. I only knew that my fight was no longer just for myself. It was for her too. We were the discarded people, the inconvenient pasts, and together we were about to write a new, unexpected chapter.
The town where Margaret lived was a portrait in gray. It was a place of shuttered factories and weary, forgotten main streets, a world away from the manicured lawns and gleaming glass of my son's life. I found her house on a small dead-end street. It was a tiny, dilapidated clapboard house, the paint peeling, the porch sagging as if under the weight of a long and difficult history. It was a house that was crying out for a restorer. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The woman who answered was the woman from the wedding photos, but 10 years of hardship had etched new lines on her face. Her eyes, however, were the same, gentle, tired, and full of a deep, quiet sadness. She looked at me with a wary confusion. "My name is Arthur Vance," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "My son Leo is married to your daughter." The recognition dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by a flicker of fear, as if she expected me to be an emissary of bad news from the world that had abandoned her. I quickly explained why I was there. I didn't lead with my eviction. I led with my confusion. I told her I was trying to understand Evelyn and that I had a feeling she was the only person who could help me. I showed her the wedding photo, the one of her looking so lost and alone. Something in my own quiet grief must have resonated with her, because after a long moment, she opened the door wider and invited me in. Her home was sparse but spotlessly clean. We sat at a small, wobbly kitchen table, drinking instant coffee from mismatched mugs, and we told each other our stories. She spoke of Evie, the bright, ambitious girl who was ashamed of her roots, who had slowly, methodically, and cruelly cut her mother out of her life, like a surgeon excising a tumor she found unsightly. I spoke of Leo, the kind, gentle boy who had been consumed by his wife's ambition, who had stood by in silence as his own father was cast out. We were two sides of the same coin, two parents who had given everything to our children only to be deemed unworthy of the lives they had built. A bond formed between us in that small, sun-faded kitchen, a powerful alliance forged in shared pain. I looked around at her small, broken-down house. I saw the leaky faucet, the drafty window, the cracked plaster on the walls, and I saw my new purpose. "I'm a builder, Margaret," I said, my voice finding a strength I hadn't felt in months. "This is what I do. I fix things. Let me fix this." She protested, of course. She was a proud woman who was not used to accepting help. But I insisted. This was not charity. This was a partnership. I told her about the small nest egg I had left, the rainy day fund that was now my war chest. "Evelyn took my home," I said. "Let me use my skills to restore yours. Let's build something together." And so we began. I moved out of the soulless motel and into her small, spare guest room. For the next 2 months, we worked. I became a builder again, and it was like coming back to life. My hands, which had felt so useless and old, remembered their purpose. I replaced the rotten porch boards. I replastered the walls. I fixed the plumbing. I taught her how to use a power drill, and she taught me how to make the simple, hearty soup she had made for Evelyn as a child. As we worked, we talked. I learned about the fierce, loving mother she had been, and she learned about the proud, devoted father I had been. We were restoring more than just a house. We were restoring each other's dignity. We were building a new kind of family, a quiet, resilient one, out of the rubble of the ones that had discarded us. During that time, my investigator kept me informed. I learned that Evelyn was hosting a major charity gala at their house. It was the social event of the season, a massive performance designed to cement her and Leo's place at the pinnacle of the city's elite. The guest list included the city's most powerful and influential people, the very audience for whom Evelyn had constructed her elaborate lie of a tragic orphaned past. The date was set, the stage was built, and the final, crucial piece of my plan fell into place. Margaret and I were not just going to confront her, we were going to do it on her terms, in the middle of her greatest performance. I bought 2 tickets to the gala online, a simple anonymous donation to the charity it was supporting. I looked at Margaret, her hands now steady, her eyes no longer filled with just sadness, but with a spark of the fighting spirit she thought she had lost. Her little house was no longer sagging. It was strong, solid, and filled with a new light, just like her. "It's time, Margaret," I said. "It's time to go home." She looked at me, a slow, determined smile spreading across her face. "I think you're right, Arthur," she said. We were not going as victims. We were going as builders, ready to witness the demolition of a foundation built on lies. The night of the gala was a spectacle of calculated perfection, the kind of event Evelyn specialized in. We arrived not in a limousine, but in my humble, reliable sedan. We were not dressed in designer clothes, but in simple, dignified attire that spoke of self-respect, not of wealth. Margaret wore a simple dark blue dress she had sewn herself years ago, and she looked more elegant than any of the women dripping in diamonds. I wore my best suit, the one Clara had always loved. We were ghosts from a world they had tried to bury, walking into the heart of their glittering empire. The house, my house, was almost unrecognizable.
It was filled with strangers, with the sound of a string quartet, and with towering floral arrangements that seemed designed to choke the memory out of the very air.
As we walked through the foyer, I saw Leo. He was standing with a group of men, a glass of champagne in his hand, a strained, practiced smile on his face. He saw me, and for a moment he froze, his smile faltering. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, shock, guilt, fear, before his social mask slammed back into place. He started to move towards me, probably to quietly and quickly escort me out. But then he saw Margaret standing beside me, and he stopped dead. He had only met her once, briefly at his wedding, but he knew. He knew who she was. He turned pale, his eyes darting nervously towards his wife, who was holding court across the room, the radiant, confident queen of her own party. Evelyn had not seen us yet. We moved deeper into the room, a quiet, inexorable tide moving against the current of the party. And then she saw me. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, incandescent fury. She immediately began striding towards me, her movements sharp and aggressive, a shark sensing blood in the water. She was ready to have me thrown out, to make a scene, to demonstrate her absolute power in her own home. She didn't even notice Margaret at first. Her focus was entirely on me. "What in the world are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice a low, vicious snarl, the carefully constructed charm she showed the world completely gone. "I thought I made it clear you are not welcome." "I am a guest, Evelyn," I said calmly, holding up my ticket so she could see it. "I made a donation to your very worthy cause." Her face contorted with rage. She was about to call for security. This was the moment I had been planning for, the moment I had been building towards for months. I didn't say a word. I simply took one step to the side, revealing the quiet, dignified woman who had been standing just behind me. I had moved Margaret into the light. Evelyn's eyes followed my movement, and then they locked onto her mother's face. The reaction was instantaneous and profound. It was not rage. It was not annoyance. It was the silent, bone-deep terror of a fraud being exposed. All the color drained from her face. Her perfectly lipsticked mouth fell open slightly. Her eyes, which a moment before had been burning with fury, were now wide with a dawning, catastrophic horror. Her entire, meticulously crafted world, her story of being a tragic, self-made orphan, was standing 3 feet away from her in a simple blue dress, and she was about to be introduced to all of her most important friends. Her face turned pale. It was the face of a builder watching her foundation turn to dust. "Evie," Margaret said, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight of years of pain and love. "It's been a long time." The use of her childhood name was a masterstroke, a final devastating blow that shattered Evelyn's sophisticated persona, reducing her to the terrified girl from the forgotten factory town. The guests nearby, sensing the sudden, dramatic shift in the atmosphere, had fallen silent. They were watching. The queen of the party was suddenly the center of a different kind of attention. Her perfect performance had just been interrupted by a truth she could not escape. I did not need to say another word. My revenge was complete, and it was silent. I had not destroyed her. I had simply returned what she had discarded. I offered my arm to Margaret. "I think we've seen enough," I said softly. We turned, and together we walked out of that house, leaving behind the wreckage of a life built on lies. We left Evelyn standing there, a pale, frozen statue in the center of her own ruined party, forced to finally confront the ghost she thought she had buried. As we drove away, leaving the sound of the string quartet and the shocked whispers behind us, a sense of profound peace settled over me. I had not gotten my house back, I had not gotten my son back, but I had reclaimed something far more valuable, my own dignity. And I had helped another soul restore hers. We were 2 builders, 2 restorers, and we were driving home,
towards a new foundation, one built not on lies, but on the quiet, resilient strength of shared survival. Thank you for tuning in to Reddit Whispers. We've all faced moments when everything felt broken. What was your turning point? Leave it in the comments, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now.